Welcome to the show. I'm Mike.
Hi, I'm Maggie.
And we are Friends on Fire.
We are on a mission to get friends to talk about money.
So Maggie, on our last episode, we talked about kids with our kids about money.
Yeah, we interviewed our kids about money.
I thought it was pretty funny and interesting.
I thought it was pretty funny. I played the episode for my kids because they really wanted to hear it. And I played it for them like in bed one night while they were going to bed. And they asked me to play it for them again. And so I played it twice and it was getting late and they wanted to hear it again. And I was like, I can't do it again. But then like subsequent nights at bedtime, they've been asking me if I'll play the podcast. And I'm like, any episode? They're like, no, our episode. Like they just really like hearing themselves, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, my kids love hearing it too. And they will start they will start to like recreate some of the things they said on the show. So like when Mia said, I don't know, I'm done.
That was really cute.
She says that now all the time.
Yeah, super cute.
So unfortunately, the feedback was a little mixed though, because when we thought our kids wanted us to quit our jobs and spend more time with them,
turns out they'd rather have more toys and have us keep working.
Right. So I think that's a parenting opportunity for us.
Yeah, it was a little, it was mostly validating, but those questions were a little tough.
Right. But to be transparent, we kept all those answers in the show.
We did, yeah. You did a very fair job on the editing.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So this week we are back talking about adults with adults, and our mission is to get friends to talk about money. And what better way to do that than to have one of my friends over to the studio to talk about money?
By studio, do you mean the closet?
Yes, we are back in the closet recording because of the acoustics.
Yeah.
All right. So Adam Goldberg is here with us. He's my friend and neighbor, and we have two girls about the same age, and we spend a lot of time watching them play in the front yard and talking about guy stuff. And before we even started the podcast, Maggie,
what did guys talk about?
You know, like, I don't know.
I like that I've stumped you both on that question. Nobody can tell me what guys talk about. Okay.
I think we actually talk about our little girls and like what they would like for dinner and stuff like that.
Cute.
So that's a guy conversation.
I like it.
All right. So Maggie, before we even started the podcast, you know, we had identified Adam as like a great interview because his story like aligns pretty closely with the whole like vision of, you know, finding freedom and pursuing your passions and doing those things. So I'm glad we finally have him on the show.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on, Adam.
Thanks. Excited to be here.
So Adam has a incredibly interesting story, and we're going to let him dig into it a little bit. But as a quick overview, he worked in corporate America, but since left to pursue his passion of being a photographer. And not only has he done that successfully, but he has a very successful business. He's also a Instagram influencer, which I only know one Instagram influencer.
Yeah. Is it us? We have like 120 followers.
Yes. Yeah, so
does that count?
Great clarifying question. How many followers does it take to be an influencer?
I think like when you get into influencing, it probably starts at around 1,000. So
I thought you were going to say 10,000. So
no, there's micro influencers.
Yeah.
And a lot of brands really like to work with the micro influencers because their engagement is so much higher than some people maybe who have 50,000, 100,000 or 1 million.
Yeah, I like it. So there's hope for us.
I have 89.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that 82 are Russian bots. So I have a ways to go. So we'll put this in the show notes, but you can find Adam on Instagram at Adam Goldberg Photography, and he also blogs at agoldbergphoto.com. Adam, thanks again for being on the show, and let's dig in some questions. So you've had a pretty interesting life so far, and perhaps you can tell us how you got here.
Sure. So I went to college in Massachusetts, and I was a history and political science major, which means I really had two choices. I could become a lawyer, or I could go to Washington, D.C. and find a job working for the government. And I decided to go and work for the government. I did counterterrorism with the government for around 5 to 7 years or so.
By counterterrorism, you mean like Jack Ryan?
You could say that. Something pretty similar to Jack Ryan.
Okay, great.
For those that don't know, that's Jack Ryan on Netflix. Awesome show. Highly recommend.
You know, it's a series of books from Tom Clancy going back like 25 years.
I think all things started on Netflix. I think the books came after the series on Netflix, but whatever.
All right. Glad we clarified this.
Can I ask a quick question too? Did you really fall right into counterterrorism, like right out of school?
Pretty much. So it was. I graduated in 2002, so it was pretty soon after 9/11, right. And so there was a lot of counterterrorism job opportunities in Washington, D.C.
Wow. And do they use that word in the job description?
Counterterrorism?
Yeah.
Yeah, they do.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So what did you do in counterterrorism?
Well, if I told you, we probably would be locked in a different kind of closet.
I like it. He's stepping up the closet jokes.
Yeah.
I like it.
I didn't realize that Maggie, you just wanted me to set up the studio in the closet so that people could just rip on me for doing so. This
Yeah.
doesn't feel fair.
Yeah, no, I like it.
The acoustics do sound great, though.
They are very nice.
All right, let's continue.
So I worked counterterrorism for a number of years, and then I went back and got my master's in business administration. And that's kind of when I made the transition to corporate America. So I did consulting for Deloitte. I then did some consulting with Charles Schwab. And after changing careers and jobs pretty much every 6 months, I decided to make a big change and quit and do photography. Now, for a lot of my jobs, I had traveled a bunch with the government, with Deloitte as a consultant. So during all of those jobs, I had taken my camera with me and taken pictures of the cities I was in, the hotels I was staying at, or the landscapes nearby. It is a passion that I, had been following for a long time and just decided that, okay, now is the time to make that leap. And if I'm going to do it, let's do it now.
And so what year was that around?
It was about 5 years ago.
Okay.
I know the purpose of the podcast is finding freedom and financial independence, but can we talk about counterterrorism some more for a minute? Because you are the only guy I know that has worked in counterterrorism.
Well, I think a lot of people probably don't talk about it that work in it. They might work for the State Department or something like that, so you don't even know that they work in counterterrorism.
That's how Jack Ryan does it. I know that from the show. Keep going. So I know 2 people that work in counterterrorism.
Yeah, Jack Ryan and Adam Goldberg.
Jack Ryan.
Got it.
Jack Ryan. And so, there was this really cool story one time. I was working, sitting at my desk, and in walks President Bush. So obviously I stand up, shake his hand, and then we get talking. And so some of the things that we talked about were, and then we were done. He left, went about his day, and, can't really tell you what happened after that, but it was a pretty cool experience.
Could you tell us the exact date of that conversation?
I probably could look it up. I do have a little note.
Did any terrorists end up dead or in a cell after this conversation?
Can neither confirm nor deny that.
All right, so that's a really interesting path, and I think a lot of people can relate to it, where you study something in college, you get into it, it's not exactly what you thought it was going to be, or your interests or passions change. But I think what's unusual is that you went into corporate America and then made like a pretty dramatic shift. So like, what was going through your head? Like at what point did you make that decision?
Was there an exact moment?
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know if there was an exact moment, but after switching jobs 3 times in an 18-month period and now being on the lookout for another job, it was kind of at the point where it was like, should I go back and do something that will be fine? And I think a lot of people are kind of fine in their jobs. It's a job, it's a good steady paycheck. There's insurance, there's all of the benefits that come with it. And it was just at the point where for me, it wasn't worth having some of that security anymore.
Had you led your life in a way up until that point where you had an additional cushion that gave you that comfort, though? I've
always been a pretty good saver. I've always had maxed out my 401ks. I had what at the time I actually called my Caribbean fund. I was hoping to buy a house in the Caribbean. Obviously, that's not happening at the moment. But I think it's money that I was able then to leverage for when I decided to make the leap, knowing that I kind of had that cushion of, okay, I have a lot of money in savings because I, was planning for the future.
And when you were making this decision, you were married and your wife was working. Is
Correct.
That right? And so how did that give you a little more confidence to make a big change, or how did that discussion go with your wife?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. I think anytime you're making a big life decision, if you have a partner to run it by, your partner and have that discussion, she was very supportive. I think one of the big things that allowed us to make the decision is that she, at the time, was a nurse practitioner. And so, the nursing field is a fairly stable profession. So that certainly was something that we were able to leverage, but also insurance was kind of one of the other big driving factors, is that we knew that we would still have insurance coverage through her work.
It's funny, when you first talked about making the plunge, one of the things that I wrote down was to ask you about insurance, because that's, I think, often a lot of people's first question is, how will I cover that? So it's nice that you've been able to be covered through your wife.
Yeah, and I know a lot of photographers that don't have coverage. I mean, they don't have a spouse. I mean, they're paying for it themselves, and it is a big expense. And so I think for anyone that is looking maybe to make the transition from corporate job or whatever job they have to kind of self-employed entrepreneur, thinking through some of those expenses is a really important process that they need to go through.
Yeah.
There's a lot of expenses. I mean, there's not only health insurance, but there's then also your business insurance, especially depending on what your career is. So
do you think we need business insurance to be recording in this closet right now? I never really thought about it.
You're going to make closet jokes the entire interview, aren't you?
Yeah. And you can edit them out if you'd like.
All right. Actually, if you trip and fall and injure yourself in my closet, I will just laugh hysterically. It'll be karma.
And not pay the bill.
That's right. So what other considerations did you have to make when you were making this change?
I think looking at savings and startup costs, there's a lot of startup costs in theory with moving forward, starting your own business. Like I said, there's the business insurance, there's what equipment you potentially need. And then also, of course, what are your clients and who are they going to be? So how are basically going to start to generate some income? One thing that I definitely thought about, and I think people should definitely consider, is can you find ways to have multiple different sources of income? You never know when one source of income might fall. There might be a recession. There's so many factors at play. So for me as a photographer, I was thinking of, okay, so I do mostly architecture and real estate photography. So hospitality, commercial spaces, residential real estate. And so that's a pretty broad base, which is nice. So I kind of have a couple different pools of potential clients.
A good bit, yeah.
There's also, I have my Instagram account, which I do make some money through as an influencer there. So that's a second source of income. So obviously this is related to photography, but I think for anyone else who's making the consideration to make that leap is, can you find ways to make some money maybe on, websites like Upwork if you're a tech person? So I think there are a bunch of different avenues, and, think outside the box of how you can leverage your contacts of just people that who might know someone who can, introduce you to a client, anything like that of ways that you can start to generate some of that income.
And so when you made this change, how did your income compare to your previous corporate job, like in the first 6 months and then the first year? And like, what about now? Are you earning less or more than you did before?
I think that's a really good question. So, I obviously had a supportive spouse, which I think made a big difference in terms of making that leap. But, we kind of planned some costs associated and around that. And so I was doing fairly well, I would say, in the corporate world. Obviously, consultants with Deloitte do pretty well in some of these other jobs. So, I mean, I was making over six figures in my corporate work, and those first couple months and year were definitely lean, when compared to that. And I think a lot of people go and they make these kind of leaps to self-employed entrepreneur, and they last a year. And they realize that, they're not making as much money. The clients aren't coming in. And so then they go and quit. So I think, and then they go back to their corporate job. Having some savings cushion beforehand, I think, is really important, because it allows you to draw from that. And so then that way those lean years aren't quite as lean. And then you can start to progress and move forward. And as you become more established, then, okay, now I'm starting to make more money and starting to get closer and closer to maybe what you were making before. I had a really good year last year, and it was actually more than I'd made at any of my corporate jobs, which is great.
It's awesome.
But I also know the number could fluctuate this year. It might be significantly less. Planning for that is really important.
Was it your intention when you decided to become a photographer to try to earn as much or more as you were making in your corporate job? Or did you go into it thinking, I can make less
and that's okay,
but I'm going to be happier?
It was definitely, I could make less and I'm going to be happier.
Yeah.
And so, if this year and the next couple of years are less, that's okay. The satisfaction that I get from the work is worth the money that I might be making
Any
elsewhere.
Yeah. So, Mike, I don't know if you even know this about me, but my dad was a professional photographer growing up. That was his career my entire life. And your comment of fluctuation reminded me of that, because he was a professional photographer before there was like digital photography. And so it was a whole different field and era, and he had to have a studio and all this other stuff. And but he would have years where it would be like super tight, and then he would have a year where it was like, we thought we were like rich and he bought a boat and stuff, and then we would have years where it was, like much more frugal, and like he was getting by, but it's interesting because that there are certain fields like that where you can have a really great year and you can have a lower year, or a less great year, and I think how you think about that and plan for it, and again, maybe that example of like, don't always buy a boat just because you had a year that you were like super flush.
Yeah. Did you buy a boat last year?
Did not buy a boat last year. Yeah. But I think that's a great point, Maggie, especially nowadays with all of the technology that exists. It really doesn't matter what field you're in, whether, you're in IT, photography, video, there's always the new next best great thing. And so it's very easy when Canon, I'm a Canon shooter. So anytime that Canon comes out with a new camera, it's very tempting to be like, oh, I'm going to buy this. Yeah. You don't need to. It's not necessary. So I think kind of thinking through what are the things that you actually need when you make that transition from hobbyists or whatever to, okay, this is now going to be my full-time job. Thinking through what's the equipment that I actually need to satisfy my clients. And it doesn't matter who your clients is. Again, this can really be for any field. What do I need to satisfy my clients? And that's enough, and certainly enough for now. And then, you can slowly start to get new, better equipment maybe as the years go on.
It's a little bit of a random aside, but when you were mentioning multiple income sources and streams and kind of having that diversification, you mentioned Instagram and how you are making some money off of that. Was that something that was purposeful, or was it something you kind of fell into?
So that's something that I did kind of fall into just through my travels. Even before I went and did photography full time, I had a growing Instagram account, and I didn't really know that you could make money. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Monetize it in any way. And so then once I went full time and started looking, okay, how can I, start to generate some additional income to supplement what I'm doing full time, Instagram was an avenue for that.
Yeah, it's awesome. For those, I know, Mike, you mentioned his Instagram handle, which is
Adam Goldberg Photography.
Nice. It's beautiful. Like it's so cool to look at your photos and just see the amazing places you've been. And so it's a cool thing you offer the world to get to join you on some of those travels.
Thanks. Yeah, I've been really fortunate with some of the travels that I've got to go on and work with hotels and tourism boards or tourism or tour companies. So it's been really great.
One of the things, Adam, that you were talking about was kind of like your first year was super lean, and a lot of people quit after that. I know one of the things that Mike and I have spent a lot of time talking about, and we follow a number of people who talk about this. What's the guy's name? The guy that shot the minimalism documentary.
Oh, Matt Diavella?
Matt Diavella, yeah. He has we'll put it in the show notes, but he has a really awesome YouTube video about this. And I'm going to butcher the name of it or kind of what his, how he got to his point, but I'll eventually get to one. And he was basically saying it takes time to build things up. And if you get in a year and think, oh my gosh, I wasn't an instant success overnight and quit, like those are the people that don't make it. And you have to kind of go into something with this mentality and potentially a financial cushion also, that it might take years to build up a really successful practice or a really successful product or business or whatever it is that you're trying to do. And I think having that patience, but also that financial cushion, which it sounds like you had to do that, is super important.
It is. And I think that financial cushion then does come into play as well once you are in your new career. What some people have referred to it different ways, but for the purpose of this podcast, I will call it a no thanks fund. And basically what it allows you to do is if there's a client who you've had a bad experience with or who you just don't want the job for whatever reason, you're comfortable saying no thanks to that job.
Love it.
And passing up on that potential income. Because part of the reason that you quit to do this is because it's your passion. It's something that you love to do. And so if you are always just chasing the next client and saying yes to everything, it's going to take some of the joy out of it. And so being able to just say no thanks to a particular job and know that you're going to be okay, and maybe this month you have to draw from that fund, is okay.
I love the idea of a no thanks fund.
I love it.
We got to start a Friends on Fire no thanks fund.
Well, we first
don't
have to
have any funds actually.
Right.
So
well, we also have to ask people. Like we have to have people like offering to give us
You're
money
right.
first.
Yeah,
So
we've
we're a
not
little
gotten
ways
to the
away.
point where we even get to say no thanks. But I would like to aspire to say no thanks.
Would this work at my corporate job? If my boss asked me to do something, I'd be like, no thanks.
It kind of does, And I mean, I'm not giving you that advice to actually say that to your boss, but the whole point we talk about of financial freedom and the feeling and confidence that it gives you is to be able to make certain trade-offs and say, I'm not scared of losing my job. Like I take a ton of pride in what I do. I do a good job. I'm driven. I'm passionate about it. But it is the idea of having financial freedom is kind of like having a no thanks fund, right? Which I love the kind of, synergies there.
I feel like we should put this on a mug.
No
I feel
thanks.
like from this podcast, we're getting a lot of like really good like sayings and quotes.
I want Adam's face on one side of the mug and then no thanks on the other side.
That's perfect. We'll cut it out of vinyl. We'll drop one off at your house soon, Adam.
I can't wait.
It's going to be your thank you present for coming on this podcast.
A picture of your face on a coffee mug. That's what everybody wants. For your Instagram account, how many followers do you have?
I have about 100,000 right now.
That is insane.
I know.
How many do we have, Maggie, again?
118.
1,000.
Perhaps by the time this airs, maybe we'll have like 130.
But growing to that number is like astonishing to me because like, we are, we're pretty early in this process, but we also have personal like social accounts, and just the amount of time and energy it takes is like, it's a real time commitment, but also there's so much out there competing for your attention. So to get to 100,000, get to 1,000, like you need to be doing something pretty special. So hats off to you.
And like genuine, meaningful content too. Because I follow some of these people, so I'm not knocking them. But there are people who were like on The Bachelorette, and that's how I don't follow all of them, to be clear, maybe some of them. But they were on a show, they immediately overnight got an instant following. And so to actually like grow from the grounds up a following like that is really cool. And it's interesting to just kind of hear how you did that. And again, I know you mentioned it wasn't necessarily purposeful in the beginning, but it's still a huge accomplishment.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's definitely, Instagram has changed from when I first started. So the ability to grow and grow quickly is a much greater challenge than it was before. I think, Mike, to your point, there's so much content out there and you're competing with so many other people. It's difficult to grow. And so I don't know if I'd be able to get to this number now if I was starting now versus when I did whatever it was 5-7 years ago. I think it was easier to gain a following.
Like there was less noise and competition.
There was less noise. And because of that, there was a lot of people doing travel. I have most of the content on my Instagram is travel and landscape focused. So it is a little bit different than what I do kind of locally here in Atlanta. But I think that people were excited about seeing other people's travels because you do want to live vicariously in some ways through other people. And you go on and you see these people in Thailand or the Maldives and you're like, wow, I want to go there. And so I think there was that genuine engagement with people and people did want to follow you as you were kind of going on your travels and posting about them. I think now so many people are doing it that there's so much noise. And so, Maggie, to your point, it's kind of like, how do you differentiate yourself? And that's a continuous challenge, I think, on social media is how do you differentiate yourself and provide content that people still want to engage with?
Yeah. Do you know the answer to that question? How do you? That's a great question. Yeah. How do you differentiate your?
It's hard, and I think it's going to be different for every individual in terms of what path do you want to take to share content with your followers. Do you want to be in all of the photos? Do you want it to be you not in all of the photos? Do you want to focus a little bit more on video versus photography? So I mean, there's a lot of different ways and avenues that you can provide that content to followers, and you just have to see kind of what works for the individuals who are following you.
Yeah, I think there's something about authenticity too, which is, at least for me as someone who is following people, I think is one of the cool things about your Instagram and your photos is just it's authentic, and it's places you've been, and it's like you're not trying, right? You're genuinely like sharing a window into your world with people, which is what I think a lot of people are trying to, like you said, live vicariously, through others on there.
So what does the future look like for your business and your social influencing?
Yeah, I see those two things as separate. And so, for the business, for me, it's just kind of continue to find ways to create amazing content for my architecture, construction, real estate clients, and give them the content that they need, so that way then they can kind of promote their work, so that way they can grow their businesses as well. So that's kind of one of the things that I enjoy about my job, is that the work that I'm doing is actually helping someone else grow their business as well.
So I'm curious, how much of your time do you spend on like the hustle for new work and new clients and that piece versus the work itself? And has that kind of changed over the years?
It has changed over the years. I would say it's a hard balance. Gaining new clients is always going to be the biggest challenge, I think, for anybody who is trying to start their own business. There's established people in every industry. And so I think it's a slow, continuous process that never stops. What work can you do? How can you find a different way to get the attention of a potential new client?
And do you still spend a lot of time doing that? You're not to the point where people are just, knocking down your door all day and you can't do enough work to, keep up with it.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely not there yet. So, I will do everything from, obviously continue to update my website. I will do cold emails. I will do cold calling. I have pamphlets that I can send to different businesses, obviously having the specific name of someone at that business with a pamphlet that just kind of highlights my work with my information. For me, part of it is just kind of getting my work out there, again, whether it's the web or through a pamphlet, and saying, here's my work, and hopefully they like it, and then they give you a call. So it is a continuous process that never stops. And when you do run your own business, that old adage, you're going to end up working more than you did at your other job, it's true. You really do.
And would you say that your happiness and satisfaction has grown over the years as you've continued to pursue this passion of yours?
I'd say so. I think, when you first start out, you put so much pressure on yourself. And obviously there still is pressure to continue to kind of grow and be successful, not even from the financial perspective, but just from a career standpoint and job satisfaction. You want to continue to grow. That's both, getting new clients and doing more new challenging work, as well as the financial component to it. So there's always just going to kind of be that process. So I think one thing certainly for everyone to consider, if you are thinking of kind of making that jump to pursue your passion as a full-time career, is you might not end up doing exactly what you wanted it to be. So for me, when I kind of started my photography, I loved the travel and the landscapes, and that's really what my passion around photography had always been. And now I'm doing more architectural photography. So I'm photographing homes, I'm photographing hotels, I'm photographing office spaces. It's very different. And so I think making sure, though, that throughout the year you find some time to kind of continue to pursue the passion side of it that you initially got you excited about the career in the first place. So for me, I do always try, and obviously I have the Instagram, which allows me to do it maybe more than I would otherwise. But being able to kind of pursue that passion and do some of that travel and landscape work that I might not otherwise get to do is really important, because it really kind of re-energizes you from a career standpoint that, yes, this is what I like to do. This is what I love to do. And so now that I'm re-energized, and I can kind of go back and do the meaty part of my job that is the career part.
I may be reading more into what you just said, but I'm just curious on the real estate and architectural piece that you've kind of ended up more in. Was that because that's where you were finding there was a business opportunity and more money and kind of more opportunity?
That definitely played a part of it. I did travel and stay at hotels, and I was photographing hotels. And so I did enjoy that part of it, but it wasn't kind of the driving force that got me into photography. It was exactly. And so it kind of has kind of turned into okay, what's my niche? My niche is the architectural real estate photography. And that's where I can, generate more income and kind of really grow.
Yeah, I love it. I got to go back to an earlier discussion we had really quickly, just to see if you can isolate. I know we kind of asked you about like the moment you had when you decided to switch careers from some of the counterterrorism work, and then you ended up in consulting, and then essentially quit your job to go become a photographer full time and start this new business. What motivated you? Like, if you had to kind of recap and summarize, like, I know there might not have been one specific moment, but like, what was the driving force that gave you the confidence, that finally rested your fears, whatever it was? Like, what let you make that leap?
I don't know if there's one moment or one thing. I think it was a combination of things. I think it was, again, the fact that I had switched jobs 3 times in an 18-month period and was ready to go and try and find another one. And then just saying, in some ways, like, for me, it was, what's the point of going and finding that other job? Is it really just for the money? And if it is, then maybe that's not the right reason to be going and finding a job. So it was like, well, I could have tried a completely different corporate career at that point, but photography was my passion and I had the support to do it, and just made the decision, okay, I think it's time to give it a try. And it might not have worked out. I might have been one of those people who, tried it for a year or 3 years and it didn't work out. And I've been fortunate to make it work.
Did you have kids then?
We did.
Okay.
I'm
just curious, how old were they when you
had one, and she was around 1 or 2 probably at the time.
How old are your kids now?
6 and 3.
Okay. Oh, very, very similar ages.
That's why we're such good friends.
Yeah.
Right.
Nice.
Remember,
They're both girls?
Yes.
Okay.
Remember
you said that, but I missed the exact age thing.
Yeah. But I remember we go over and we watch our kids and talk about guy stuff, which we could not identify as a particular
no one knows
topic.
What guy stuff you talk about.
I think guy stuff is different when you have kids versus when you don't have kids.
Yeah, particularly when you have little girls also.
That's right.
It's like,
did you go see Frozen 2? Yes, yeah. I got to go see Frozen 2 as well.
What'd you like better, Frozen 1 or Frozen 2?
Yeah, guy stuff.
Yeah.
So what advice would you have for someone who's thinking about quitting their job and pursuing their passions full time? We're asking for some friends.
Yeah, not us.
Mark and Maddie.
All right. Well, for Mark and Maddie,
sound like a nice people.
Yeah, they sound like a great duo. I think before making the switch is to really just think through all of the angles of making that switch. So we kind of have talked about some of them. So kind of, where are your savings at? What are your expected costs going to be? Do you have some potential clients lined up, or are you going to be really starting from scratch? And how is that going to potentially impact how your business starts and grows? Insurance, both from the health insurance side as well as your business insurance side. So really thinking through all of those things and then saying, okay, what equipment do I need? And then saying, okay, is this really something that I'm willing to commit to? Because I think a lot of people, as we've kind of talked about here a little bit, are in it for a year. They realize that they're maybe not going to quite be where they were hoping to be at after a year, and decide to fall back on maybe a different career. Are you going to have that commitment to really push through and see it through for 3-5 years, and hopefully at that point really have it be a successful business and your new career?
All right. Well, Adam, thank you so much for coming on the show. This is a great story, and I think a lot of people are going to find it interesting, enlightening, and probably inspirational. So thank you for coming on the show. All right. So you can keep up with Adam on Instagram at Adam Goldberg Photography, and on his website, agoldbergphoto.com. So, Adam, I think tomorrow morning you should have all of our listeners as
You're going to get at least 4 more listeners tomorrow, Adam. So however you want to thank us for that, it's up to you.
Right.
I'll try and send some folks your way as well.
Yeah, so thank you so much. Really enjoyed the discussion, and it was great to meet you. And for anyone who has any question or comments, as always, you can call us at 404-981-3370. You can also text us at that number if you prefer to text in a comment. And leave us a comment, question, or tip, and we will play it on the air.
And please leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to this podcast. It helps other friends find our podcast when you leave your feedback.
You can also find us at friendsonfire.org. If you want to check out our latest episodes, sign up for email alerts, or get in touch with us.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, Maggie. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
Thanks,
thank
Maggie.
you. Bye. Thank
Bye.
you guys all.
All right. Bye.
Bye.